people who even might come into the doors of a church who think they are saved and realize, wait a minute, I might not be on the right path with God. But yet their lives are changed. And we see the gospel moving forward more and more. So this last week, my throat, if you notice from last week, I don't sound like I'm about to die. Last week was fortunately, it was fun, but not so much fun. I was not feeling great, but it was also my birthday. So if you notice, and if you go back to the recording last week, there was a spot where my voice broke, and not just broke, if you didn't notice, but broke big time, to which I got back into my car, and my wife looked over at me and goes, "Hey, happy birthday. How's puberty going for you?" Thanks, appreciate it. No, but it has been, as much as we've been dealing with sickness, and my wife is unfortunately at home, not feeling great herself this morning. It has been quite a week for our household, but we really have appreciated your prayers throughout this last week. Speaking of my household, you know a little bit about my personality. I do a lot of different show binging. Get on Netflix and you start watching through a show, and my wife and I switch back and forth between comedies and cop dramas. We'll do a comedy show for a little while, and then we do something serious like a cop drama. And we really like a lot of the cop dramas, but I've loved one show in particular, Law and Order. I have watched this show since I was in junior high. My parents got me into Law and Order. They started watching it, and I'm sitting there going, well, you know what? I got nothing better to do. I should be doing my homework, but to me, as a middle schooler, watching TV was a lot better than doing my homework, obviously. And my parents didn't know I had homework, so I'd sit there and watch TV, while on the other hand, they'd sit there and go, no, he's supposed to be doing something more important with his time. But as I was watching Law & Order, I got more and more into this show, and I love my favorite character is Jack McCoy, the prosecutor. Love his attitude, this righteous indignation, especially when he gives this rousing closing argument at the end, and it convinces the jury, and the jury comes home and they go, guilty. And this guy who you knew did it the entire episode looks shocked. Like, how did I get caught? Jack McCoy gotcha. But what about the episodes where they didn't get caught? And that's where I discovered some Law and Order episodes where, unfortunately, the person you knew was guilty the entire time got off. Or, on a couple of occasions, where the person you knew was innocent got caught up in the crossfire. What such occasion like this? I sat there next to my dad, and this guy who you knew didn't do anything. By the end of the episode, he was the one getting charged and getting in trouble for something that he didn't do, while the bad guy got away. I sat there and I looked at my dad and I went, you better be ready to buy a new TV. I'm about to throw a shoe at this. And I sat there and I went, where's the justice in this? Where's the justice in the good guy getting charged and the bad guy getting away? Last week we talked about Jesus being put in front of the teachers of the law. And the teachers of the law basically trying to find something to accuse Jesus with in order to get him executed. Why are the teachers of the law confined to just accusing him, we would ask? Why don't they just execute him? And that's where we take a look at this story here today. And as we take a look at this story today, we ask the question, where is the justice in this? I want you to turn with me to Luke chapter 23. We start today in verse 1. Then their whole assembly rose up and brought him before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man subverting our nation, opposing payment of taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king." So Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him, "You've said it." Pilate then told the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no grounds for charging this man." But they kept insisting, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee where he started, even to here." When Pilate heard this, he asked if the man was a Galilean. Finding that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem during those days. Herod was very glad to see Jesus. For a long time he wanted to see him because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some miracle performed by him. So he kept asking him questions, but Jesus did not answer him. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt, mocked him, dressed him in a brilliant robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Previously, they had been hostile towards each other. Pilate called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You have brought me this man as one who subverts the people. But in fact, after examining him in your presence, I have found no grounds to charge this man with those things you accuse him of. Neither has Herod, because he has sent him back to us. Clearly, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will have him whipped and then release him." For according to the festival, he had to release someone to them. Then they all cried out together, "Take this man away, release Barabbas to us." He had been thrown into prison for a rebellion that had taken place in the city and for murder. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify, crucify him." A third time he said to them, "Why? What has this man done wrong? I have found no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him whipped and then release him." But they kept up the pressure, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified, and their voices won out. So Pilate decided to grant them their demand and released the one they were asking for, who had been thrown into prison for rebellion and murder, but he handed Jesus over to their will. So why did the Jewish teachers of the law have to go to Pilate to begin with? The Romans, when they came in, they knew how to consolidate power. What they did is they took the Jewish authority, they took their right to execute, to deliver justice away from them. The Romans during that time were the only ones with the power to legally execute anybody. Now, granted, a lot of outlying areas, there were still stonings going on, but the Romans were the only ones with the power to execute legally. And so if someone did something that, according to Jewish law, that mandated execution, they had to go and get Roman approval. Otherwise, it would be illegal. Here's the issue, though. The Romans care only for Jewish politics when it concerned them. The Romans really don't care about the Jewish law or biblical law. And why would they? They are heathen Gentiles, and they don't believe in the Jewish law, the biblical law, or the God behind it. The Romans really only cared for their own power and their own authority. When Jewish politics started interfering in their power and their authority, that's when they started caring about what was going on with Jesus. And that's when they would take it into their own hands. When it came to Jewish laws about blasphemy, the Romans really didn't care that much, especially not the Roman governor who was in power at this time. To the teachers of the law, they knew they had to take Jesus and accuse him in front of Pilate, the Roman governor. But they can't come up to Pilate and go, "We're charging him with blasphemy, we want him executed." Why? Because Pilate's not going to care about that. Now, here's what we need to understand about Pilate. First, Pilate is a tyrant. Pilate was not known for being a benevolent ruler. Not that a lot of rulers during that time, during the Roman Empire, were known as benevolent to begin with. We can track through the line of Caesars and recognize that a lot more of them were crazy as compared to benevolent. But Pilate did not want to be in Judea. Pilate did not like his position in Judea and could not care less for the Jewish people. So Pilate had no issue with executing people when it suited him. He had no issue with killing mass groups of Jewish people if they interfered in Roman business. Until that is, the person that the crowd of the teachers of the law took Jesus. They bring Jesus to him. And all of a sudden he's going, what is this? When they take him to Pilate, they charge him with three things. Three things that they charge Jesus with. And it's interesting what they say here. Because remember, they were trying to charge Jesus with blasphemy in the trial before. But here, they bring up different charges, really. First, that he was misleading the nation. Now, what are they getting at here? They're really charging him with trying to take Israel away from Rome. What they're trying to charge him with is insurrection. They're charging him with lying to the Israelites, to the Jewish people, and trying to deceive them into rebelling against Rome. That's what they mean by misleading the nation. That's the first thing they try to charge Jesus with. The second thing attached onto that is that he was preventing taxes to Caesar. Now, if we remember this story, they're not telling it the way it actually happened, are they? They had tried to trap Jesus in this question. Jesus, is it biblically lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And Jesus said, what? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and God what is God's. Did he forbid taxes to Caesar? He did not. He never forbade taxes to Caesar. In fact, he turned it back around and trapped them in it. But what have they done? But they have taken his words and they have twisted them in order to make it seem like Jesus is committing treason against Rome, which goes into the third charge, the final thing, that he is the Messiah, the Christ, the King. Now, the Jewish law teachers of the law, they consider this blasphemy. But here's the thing. Again, Romans don't care about the Jewish laws of blasphemy. What they do care about is someone trying to proclaim themselves as king. And that's why they charge him with this. Because Jesus proclaiming himself king is treason. Now, is it true that he is king? That he is the Christ, that he is the Messiah? Absolutely. Jesus did proclaim himself king, but he proclaimed himself king of a very different kingdom. And we see this in the other accounts, that even in front of Pilate, Pilate asks him, hey, who are you really? They say you're a king. And Jesus says, yeah, but I'm king of a very different nation, of a very different kingdom. They're all worried about this earthly Israelite kingdom. But Jesus is king of something so much, much more. They don't care about that at all. The teachers of the law don't care about that. They're just trying to get Jesus killed. But here's the thing. The people tried to proclaim Jesus as this earthly king on multiple occasions. They tried to press gang him into the service of this earthly political kingdom. And each time, Jesus did what? He refused, and he backed away. Why? We would ask, why would Jesus do that? If it's true that he really is king, why would Jesus refuse them? This right here is why. Jesus knew this was coming. They're trying to charge him with treason. And if Jesus had accepted those people's demands at that time and let them proclaim him king, then these teachers of the law would have a very legitimate charge right now. But here's the thing, they don't. They don't have anything. Jesus never proclaimed himself king of this earthly Israel trying to rebel against Rome thing that these people thought that he was trying to do. He was king of something much, much more. And that's the point. In every one of these charges, they're all twistings or lies about what Jesus has really done. They are all false charges. And the teachers of the law know it. And this is where Pilate asks Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? He understands the charges they are saying. Pilate understands that what they're charging Jesus with is treason. And so basically what he's asking is, do you agree? He's trying to question Jesus himself and be a prosecutor. He asks Jesus, are you a king? And if Jesus admits it, yeah, I'm the king of Israel. I'm the one who should be sitting on the throne that Herod's in right now. If he admits to that, well, that's all the proof Pilate needs. But Jesus put the responsibility right back on Pilate and says, you have said so. That's what you might be thinking. Or in other words, you said it. And he put the responsibility, just like he put the responsibility back on the teachers of the law in the last passage, he puts the responsibility back on Pilate. We'll talk more about why later, because this will become very important. But notice how he never says anything that would amount to treason in the eyes of Pilate, who then says, I find no guilt in this man. He's wondering at this point, why are these guys wasting my time? Once again, Pilate does not like the teachers of the law. These guys were constant problem causers to Pilate. And really, if he wasn't so worried about riots happening, which is really what Pilate's worried about, because if riots start happening in the streets of Jerusalem, Caesar's going to blame him, and then Pilate's going to end up being executed. But if it wasn't for Pilate worrying about these riots, he probably would rather want the teachers of the law going up on those crosses for all the problems that they've caused him. But the teachers of the law, they see they're not getting anywhere with these charges, and so they see that Pilate is worried about a riot, and that's exactly what they play on. But in the midst of playing on this, they make a critical error right here, something that could really hurt their case. They say that he is starting up teaching and making the people rise up. But in the midst of this, they say, starting in where? Galilee. If Jesus is Galilean, then that makes him Herod's issue, not mine. And that's what Pilate's thinking. And Pilate wants to wash his hands of this. He doesn't want to play any more role in this waste of his time. And so Herod can deal with this and take it off his plate. Pilate then sends him over to Herod and let Herod judge this guy. Now, Herod is an interesting case because Herod at one point did want Jesus dead because of the connection between Jesus and John the Baptist. But then Herod starts hearing about all the signs and wonders. And what does he do? He gets curious. Jesus is an oddity to Herod. And so Herod is glad to see that Jesus came. Not because he wanted to kill Jesus at this time, but it's not because he believed in Jesus either. Herod just wanted some entertainment. And Herod sees Jesus as a way to get some entertainment. He wants to see one of these signs. Give me one of these wonders. Turn this water into wine. Heal one of my people. Let me see a trick. And so he's just like all of these other evil people out there who are just using Jesus to see a sign or a wonder, like Jesus is some sort of magician. But Herod takes some time to question Jesus. But every time he questions Jesus, he gets no answer from him. Jesus does not even answer Herod. Herod keeps asking him if he's a king, basically trying to go get an answer out of Jesus. Jesus doesn't answer. Jesus is not going to give them a basis for their charges. And the chief priests, they see this, and so in front of Herod, they try to start accusing Jesus. They are saying, he said these things. He did these things. And Jesus isn't answering because he knows that if he answers, they're just going to try to trap him. They're going to take his words, and they're going to twist them. But Herod's not a fan of the chief priests either. He really doesn't care about what they want. But it says Herod begins to mock and beat Jesus. His soldiers begin to mock and beat Jesus. He's no fan of Jesus either. He wanted a trick. He wanted a sign, a wonder. Jesus didn't give him an answer. Jesus didn't give him what he wants. So, you think you're a king, huh? Let's put some robes on you. And so we see Herod begin to join in this beating, in this mocking of Jesus. And they send them back to Pilate, though. Even though he mocked Jesus, even though he beat Jesus, Herod still doesn't think he's guilty. And so Herod sends him back to Pilate, agreeing with Pilate there's no basis for these charges. Not because they care about Jesus, but because they think the chief priests are wasting their time and they don't see Jesus as the threat. At most, Herod sees Jesus as a crazy man. So Pilate looks towards the crowd after they get back to him, and Pilate goes further by saying that he even questioned Jesus in front of the crowd. And we see this in other accounts, that he does this long questioning of Jesus over even what the basis of truth is, and still finds no guilt in Jesus. Now we need to understand, this is not because Pilate has some soft spot for Jesus, nor because Pilate believes in Jesus. Pilate is not some secret follower of Jesus. Pilate just doesn't care about the teachers of the law or Jesus. What he does care about is two things. One, potential riots. And two, in other accounts of this gospel, we see that Pilate's wife, who is very superstitious, had a dream about Jesus the night before. And this dream scared her to death, to the point that when she saw Jesus being questioned by Pilate, she tells her husband, "Don't have anything to do with this man." Pilate does care about his wife. And so Pilate wants this Jesus away from him. It's causing problems for Pilate. These chief priests are wasting his time, and he's finding himself in a no-win situation. If he lets Jesus go, the crowd in front of him is going to riot. If he kills Jesus, he doesn't know that the followers of Jesus are, whether they're violent or not. He doesn't know if they're going to start rising up. And so he's got a huge problem on his hands. And now he's got his wife's crazy premonitions to worry about too. And in the meantime, he's sitting there going, I don't like these chief priests. They just brought me this. But we need to understand, he does not care about Jesus. But what he does care about is his own self-preservation. Pilate reminds the crowd that neither he nor Herod found anything worthy of guilt. Now just think about this for a second. Neither of these guys have any reason to give Jesus any kind of latitude. They care nothing about Jesus, and up to this point shown no inkling of having mercy for anyone else. These two Gentiles, and Herod is a Gentile, he's not a full Jew if he had any Jewish blood in him at all. They both question Jesus and find nothing that would merit an execution. Two tyrants who have shown no issue with killing people in the past go, this guy's innocent. And so really think that these guys are, again, they look at the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and they know that these guys are just wasting their time. But to calm the crowd, he says that he will have Jesus punished, flogged, and released. And how he has Jesus punished is horrible. He had him flogged. Now, flogging in those times involved this. You had what's called a cat and nine tails. I don't know if you've ever heard of what one of these things actually is, but just imagine for yourself a whip that came out with multiple leather straps coming off of the handle. And embedded in these leather straps are shards of metal and glass. And they would take this thing and they would just wail on whoever it was that was being punished. It's recorded that 40 lashes from this thing would kill a man. And usually the sentence for flogging was 39 lashes. And so they would beat these guys until they were absolutely unrecognizable. Pilate says that he will have Jesus punished like this and then released. It will be a wonder if Jesus does survive this. But if he dies, Pilate doesn't care anyway, as long as it gets the crowd to leave him alone. But it's still not enough for the teachers of the law and the crowd. They want Jesus dead. They want to be sure he is dead. They want him on a cross. And Pilate is getting worried about this riot starting with these people right here. In other accounts, the teachers of the law even start questioning Pilate's loyalty to Caesar. Basically saying, if you don't kill this man, you're no friend to Caesar's. And Pilate starts to realize what direction they're going. That if he doesn't do something, then they're going to tell Caesar, they're going to send letters over to Caesar. This guy just let someone who proclaimed himself king, let him go. And what's going to happen to Pilate at that point? This is spelling trouble for him. And so he gives them away. In other accounts, he tells them that he makes the option available that he is allowed to release a prisoner on behalf of another one over Passover as a gift from the Romans. And who do they have locked behind in the jail? Barabbas. Barabbas, who was a known murderer and a terrorist behind bars awaiting execution. This guy was hated, okay? Imagine for yourselves the bin Laden of that time. That's who Barabbas was. He wasn't just some random murderer. This guy had gone around and committed guerrilla executions for years. The teachers of the law don't like him. The crowd doesn't like him. But look at this. They hate Jesus so much that they would rather have someone they know is guilty released than Jesus released. Sometimes we focus on what's going on between Barabbas and Jesus, but we forget about this right here, that the crowd wanted someone who was a known murderer released rather than Jesus, who they know is innocent. Don't think that these crowds for a second think for any second that Jesus is actually guilty of these things. The teachers of the law created these lies to begin with. They know Jesus is innocent. They're the ones who twisted the charges to begin with. But it doesn't matter. They want Jesus dead. And so they trade Barabbas for Jesus. And Pilate gives in to the crowd's demands. And so I ask you today, is that justice? Let's look at the three groups here that are going on with this. The teachers of the law, by name, what are they meant to do? They're meant to uphold and teach the law of God. They are meant to be keepers of this law of God, to lead people to God. But they're meant to be just. What is a king supposed to do? Herod. A king was meant to judge rightly. When we put someone in political authority over us, we are doing that with the hope that they will make the right judgment calls, that they will judge rightly. When we go to a judge in a courtroom, we expect them to go and blindly judge based on the law and the law alone. The governor was meant to govern rightly. Pilate was meant to govern in the right way, to apply the law as it had been said. Instead, what are all three of them doing? All three groups are only looking out for themselves. Not a single one of them care about Jesus. Not a single time do they actually stop and think, we're about to execute an innocent man. They are all looking out for themselves. The teachers of the law, they want Jesus dead to protect their own power. They know Jesus is chipping away by his teaching at their hypocrisy, that they have abused the people for too long, and that Jesus is starting to expose them for what they really are, and that's a bunch of frauds. And they have to protect their power. So desperately they cling on to their own power, corruption, and hypocrisy that they are not willing to repent. Instead, they're willing to kill the man who's actually meaning to lead them to something better. Instead, they don't want that better. They want to kill Jesus. Herod wants entertainment. That's all he wants. He wants a jester. He wants a clown. He wants a magician. He's like some spoiled child sitting on this throne. And when he doesn't get it, what does he do? He beats and mocks Jesus. Now, look at the irony of this, okay? Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate saying this guy's innocent, and yet he still beat and mocked Jesus. And so we see the attitude of Herod right there, that Herod really doesn't care. Herod just wanted his own entertainment. If he couldn't get Jesus to do a sign, he's going to enjoy it himself by bullying someone. And so Herod, a king, really acts more like a spoiled child. Pilate wants to protect his own authority and life. Pilate knows that if riots start, he's in trouble. Pilate knows that his wife is in the back going, don't have anything to do with this man. Pilate's got a lot of moving parts around him, and Pilate also is not a good man to begin with. Pilate doesn't care anything about putting people up on crosses. And so it's amazing to see that he let this go on for as long as it did. And so Pilate keeps questioning and questioning, but at the end of the day, Pilate knows Jesus is innocent. Barabbas is guilty, and yet who did he let go? He let Barabbas go, knowing full well that Jesus is innocent. Pilate wants to protect his own authority and life. They all know Jesus is innocent. Now think back for a second. I told you something a while ago. I said, hold on to something when I said Jesus is putting the responsibility back on them. He put the responsibility back on the teachers of the law when they questioned him about if he's the Messiah and said, you said it. Did the same thing to Pilate. You said it. He's putting the responsibility back on them because they all are hinting at something here, that they know what's really going on. They know at least some inkling of who they're dealing with, and yet they're still making moves to kill Jesus. They know at the very least Jesus is innocent, and they all still trade a known murderer in place they execute Jesus. This is not justice. This is not justice. And as I read through this story, I thought about all those times I watched those shows and I saw the bad guy get away while an innocent man gets put in prison for something that someone else did. And you sit there and you think, this is not justice. This is garbage. We see so many different injustices in the world today. You can turn on the news at any point in time and see all the injustice in the world today. There are a lot of you today who have issues within your own families, getting treated badly by your own family members. I know I've heard those stories. You've come up and you've told me about family members who treat you very badly, and you go, where is the justice in that? In churches today, there are people who get treated badly all the time, people who have left churches and they go, I can't go back. Why? Because I was treated so horribly here. And they go, where is the justice, especially in a church where people should be upholding each other and upholding the law of God? Where is the justice in that? The world is full of injustice. What do? Notice something in this whole passage. What did Jesus do? He stayed silent. How? Jesus, throughout this story, doesn't say much at all. He doesn't have to. Because Jesus has said to everyone that this is needed to happen this entire time. Jesus knew what was coming. Jesus knew what charges they were going to try to bring up against him. And Jesus knew the end result of this whole thing. But Jesus also knew this needs to happen. This was all part of the plan. These teachers of the law, they think that they've got a victory in this. Nope. Herod thinks he's gotten rid of someone who annoyed him. Nope. Pilate thinks he's rid of this whole Christianity thing, that he's done away with another sect that's going to cause him problems. Nope. This is all part of the plan. And what they don't realize is one other crucial fact in this. Jesus said to each one of them, "You said it." If Jesus is truly the King, if he is truly the Messiah, then at the end of the day, every single person on this planet has to stand before the true judge and has to give an account for what they have done here. You said it. What Pilate and the teachers of the law and Herod don't realize is that they did, because they're already dead by this point now, but they had to give an account for this right here. They don't realize it when they're actually doing this, but they had to give an account for what they did on this day. They answered for it. And so when we talk about the injustice in the world and we sit there and go, these things are so unfair. Why are these people getting away? Why are innocent people getting into troubles while bad people are getting away with things? Why are we sitting there and not doing anything about it? And we realize, wait a minute. Guess what? Justice ultimately belongs to God. We think that there are people who are going to get away with things in this life. They won't. Nobody will. Nobody will. But let me tell you something right now. This is not just good news for those who have felt injustice, but this is not great news for those who have not made their hearts right before God. For those who might have something, because guess what? God delivers equal justice upon everybody. And guess what? According to the law of God, who's guilty? Everybody. That includes us. God will deliver justice. It belongs to Him, not us. We're lucky to still even be alive. But even with this, we recognize that even though we see injustice in the world today, this is all still part of the plan. And sometimes we forget that. On one hand, we sit there and we go, how could this happen? How could Jesus just not stand up for himself? But just think of what would have happened if Jesus hadn't gone to that cross that day. Where's salvation? Where's the way out? Where's hope? Where's love? Where's any of it if Jesus hadn't gone to that cross that day? God knows what He's doing, even if we don't understand it. Jesus was innocent and was still condemned, but it needed to happen. Things happen in this life that we don't understand, that might seem so unjust to us, that might seem so horrible to us. But two things we need to remember. First, we have done that to other people before. You might not even know it. But there have been people that we all have hurt, intentionally or unintentionally, in this life, that they remember. We're all guilty of it. That's first off. Second off, thank the Lord that He provided a way out by being silent during this whole thing and going up to that cross. Even though it seems so unjust, even though it seems like this shouldn't have happened at all. If it hadn't have happened, there'd be no grace. There'd be no mercy. There'd be no love. And that's a horrifying thought right there. And yet Jesus willingly stayed silent while all these people were making these unjust charges. Why? Because this was all part of the plan. God knew what He was doing. God knows what He's doing. And it might seem right now, when we're in this temporal life, that we don't understand. It might seem like good people are getting thrown to the wayside while bad people are getting away with all this stuff. Guess what? God sees all this stuff going on. And every single person will have to give an account. And what God will do is ultimately completely and totally right. And so the question is not, will justice happen or not? Justice will happen. The question really is, do you trust God enough to let him deal with it? Do you trust God enough in his plan to let it happen and let God deal with situations that we can't? Because sometimes we get so worried about what's going on in the lives around us and the people that have hurt us or the people that are hurting other people. We look on the news and we get freaked out and we get so stressed out because of what's going on out there that we forget God's still in control of this whole thing. And God knows exactly what he's doing. It might not make sense to us, but guess what? We're not God. God knows what he's doing. And God will do what is good and what is right. Do you trust in a good God who will one day make everything right once again? Do you trust him? Even though the world might seem unjust, do you trust in a God who will deliver justice? Trust in him even when it doesn't make any sense, even when it seems unjust. Trust in the character of a God who is, by definition, just. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for your justice. We thank you that you will not let things go, but that you will deliver justice. We thank you also for your grace and mercy, that even though we deserve that justice as well, that you still here provided a way out so that we could have mercy and grace. We thank you for your love, and we thank you for your justice as well. In your name, amen.